I'm calling this meeting to order. This is a Redmond City Council study session held on Tuesday, July 8th, 2025, commencing at 7 p.m. Council members in attendance are Councilmember Salahuddin, Councilmember Nueva Camina, Council Vice President Forsyth, Councilmember Stewart, Councilmember Fields, Councilmember Anderson, and myself, Council President Kritzer. There are 3 items on our agenda tonight: the 2025 Annual Community Survey results, Transportation Master Plan status update, and Council talk time. The first item on the agenda is the 2025 Annual Community Survey results. Lisa Marr, Executive Deputy Director, will introduce this item. Go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Tonight, I'd like to welcome and introduce Ian Stewart. He is our Senior Principal with EMC Research. And tonight, Ian's here to present the results of this year's annual survey and answer any questions you might have. So welcome, Ian, and I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening, everyone. And would you like me to take questions during or at the end? What's your preference?
Let's do at the end, just to streamline.
Okay. Well, let's get started. First, let me tell you what we did. This survey is one you're probably familiar with by now if you've been at this meeting before. If you haven't, let me tell you some more about it. We are looking to measure general satisfaction with the city government and measure residents' priorities for future planning and improvements. So the survey has covered a variety of topics going all the way back to, I think, 2014 now. We have survey data that goes back that far. This survey was conducted March 27th to the 28th of 2025. The last 3 iterations of this survey use the same approach. We call it an address-based sampling approach. The easiest way to think about this is that the U.S. Postal Service has addresses for virtually all homeowners. And so we use that as a way to send this postcard. You can see the postcard on the right, which has a really generic invitation. Invitation is generic on purpose. We don't want people to come here or not come to the survey, not necessarily understanding what it's about. So it says local issues. What is that? And people don't really know, and that's intentional. We don't want them to really understand what that might be. So there's some small differences. In the pre-2023 survey, we did that in a different method. So that was using a voter survey. So the universe here we're talking to is a wider universe. If you're thinking about concentric circles, right? There's sort of everyone who lives in the city, and as you start narrowing that circle, you get to voters, which is smaller, right? So that you're going to exclude some people who are younger, who are lower income, things like that get us to the ABS sampling approach. Did a total of 536 interviews this year. That works out at a margin of error of plus or minus 4.2 percentage points. So we talk about margin of error. We don't spend a ton of time on it, but essentially what I want you to keep in mind is that any number you're seeing is accurate to within that plus or minus 4.2 percentage points. It's the most accurate when we're at the far ends of the scale. So if you see something that's like an 80-20 conversation, a lot more likely that's the case. Whereas if we're at 50-50, that margin of error of 4% comes into play. So it could be 54, it could be 46, right? So when we're at that sort of 50-50 mark is where the margin of error really comes into play. Like the previous years, the survey is offered in multiple languages, but even with that offering, virtually everyone's taking it in English. So this is a way that we can include and be more inclusive for everybody, but still, as a result of people's preferences, they're still taking it primarily in English. Where we can, we're comparing to last surveys, which is a great, powerful tool that you've got in the city. What was happening around the time that we were doing this survey? A couple things you might recall back in April, early all the way to back into March. There's a lot of discussion of light rail here. The Firehouse Teen Center was being discussed. There was a new apartment complex being proposed. So a couple of these things were in the news at the time that might be influencing part of what is happening in the survey. The survey starts with some quality of life and priority questions. And this is our first question. If you look at the lower left-hand corner, you'll see the question number. So we're very early in the survey. The second question, entirely overall. We're asking people on a scale of excellent, good, only fair, and poor, what do you think is the quality of life here in Redmond? Is it excellent, very good, satisfactory, only fair, or poor? And so on this scale, we then collapse the 2 excellent and very good ratings at the top in the dark blue. The excellent is broken out in the dotted line there, so you can kind of get a sense of how much of the positive is made up of the excellent. Then the satisfactory is sort of a middle grade, and the negative there. And what you're noticing here, you're going to notice this throughout the survey, is that there's some improvement between 2024 and 2025, kind of throughout the survey when we look at a lot of the survey responses. And this one particularly, what do you think about the quality of life in Redmond, has rebounded a bit to 83%. Now you'll notice that the excellent hasn't really changed at all. So what that means is it's the very good that's changing, right? Not the excellent rating. So that's kind of the same. You can follow those trend lines throughout and sort of see how things are doing. Pretty stable here, but an increase between 24 and 25. Clearly, as I talked about a few minutes ago, the margin of error, outside of that margin of error, right? We're talking about 8 points or double what that size is at the margin of error. Another question we use to warm people up, what is the best thing about living in Redmond? This is an open-ended question. When we talk about open ends, this allows the respondent to say whatever they want. So they're gonna give us a sentence, a paragraph, something longer. We put those back into categories. We tried to keep these categories consistent over time, but of course we get new categories all the time, people saying new things. But these ones have been relatively consistent on this early question about what's the best thing about living in Redmond. This is a great positive for us to pat ourselves on the back. We're showing you on the far right what's changed between 24 and 25. A positive number, obviously, means that number was up in mentions. Negative means it's down in mentions, and you'll see that throughout the survey as we talk about these. A couple things that went down in terms of mentions. Accessibility, everything is close, and low crime, safe, and cleanliness went down a little bit, but that's sort of belying what's going to come next about crime and safety. You'll see that change. And then some of the other mentions we've seen here, these are pretty consistent over time. Not a ton of changes we've seen in these intro question as a warm-up. We also ask a question here in the open end saying, what do you think is the most important problem facing the city of Redmond today? This one, you'll start to see some different changes here, right? There's two of them that are outside of the margin of error. One, growth, overdevelopment, overpopulation. And when we talk about open-end concerns here, we usually say about 10% is significant. There's three that are well over that: traffic, growth and overpopulation, overdevelopment, and affordable housing, cost of living, and taxes. That one actually didn't change from 24 to 25. The one that did change is crime. It essentially cut in half, right? That's double the size of the margin of error, down 8 points, now to 7 points. So I think maybe that crime was a blip in 2024. We'll see the comparison here in a minute to the years. So let's go to that now. This is some of the biggest categories tracked over time. And if you kind of look through them, you'll see some trends here. This sort of reminds me, especially the growth and overpopulation. If you look before the pandemic, you can see, even during, the growth and overpopulation was in the 20s and kind of climbing up as one of the biggest concerns. It's sort of rebounding now. You can see at 21%. It's not the number one, but it's certainly number two, and it's closer than it was last year, right? Well, you can see the difference there. The other one to notice there is look at crime, that fourth one down, which last year we all said, what's happening with it? How come it's doubled? It's gone back in the other direction this year. And the affordable housing has come up since 21 and sort of stayed at that same level between 23, 24, and 25, kind of consistent between all 3 years. So this gives you a sense of what people are saying. And again, these are put into categories. So someone might be saying affordable housing. They're not just saying affordable housing, the two words. They might be saying it's too expensive to live here, houses cost too much. But some version of that goes into that category. Same for the rest of these. Crime is not just someone saying the word crime, right? They're mentioning other things that are in there that goes into that category. So we ask this same question, looking at the net change. What do you think should be the city of Redmond's #1 priority over the next 2 years? It's really, when you think about it, not all that different from the question before, but it's a different way to put it, right? So we think about it this way, what has changed? And so if you look at that, if I just sort of go back and forth briefly, you can see affordable housing, cost of living, taxes, and growth and overdevelopment, pretty clear there at 21 and 29%, right? But when you look at it this way, it changes the tier a bit. Affordable housing at 19. Now there's 3 other items that are above 10%. Growth and overdevelopment, infrastructure and modernizing things. That one wasn't really on the top tier of before. And then crime here at 11 was down 13 points from 24 to 25. So it's an even bigger drop when you put it this way to people, which I think is an interesting way to think about the challenges, right? And maybe crime is fading as a concern that people have. Clearly, a collection of other items here, they're all below 10%. Not to say they're not significant, but 8, 7, and 5, you're talking about a fraction of people mentioning that in the open end. Okay, we want to do this same question by region and to show you there are some pretty distinct differences. Now, one of the challenges here is that the margin of error starts to climb when we go geographically. But this is the first chance you really get to look at subgroups in the survey. Geographic subgroups is one thing that we use. We categorize, I believe, by zip code here. So we're taking them and saying, all right, where are people living? And then giving you a sense of geographically what are the differences. You can see in affordable housing, there's a big difference. You can imagine that there's a difference in the population living downtown versus west of downtown and east of downtown, therefore having different concerns and different ways of prioritizing those concerns. Not nearly as much different when you look at growth and overdevelopment or infrastructure. Even there, right, we're looking at margin of error differences. But clearly there's a bigger difference there when you're talking about downtown and affordable housing versus the rest of the items on this list. Okay, moving on. The next section talks all about city ratings and priorities. We wanted to first give you a sense of information sources. We asked this in many of the surveys. It's actually a later question in the survey. It's a series of them saying, tell us where you're getting your information about what Redmond city government is doing. And then we're giving them a series of questions. And the scale here is a series of response codes, but regularly and often are the two that we're choosing to show you here to put those together and saying how often are you using that source. Once again, the net change at the far right, there's one that jumps out above all the rest of them, the City of Redmond Focus Print newsletter, up 14 points between 24 and 25. So clearly something is different here, right? That's statistically, if we're at 14 points, we're well over that margin of error. Looking regularly and often, that's 52% of everyone telling us that. Word of mouth is the second most popular, which it often is in a town of Redmond size, that people are talking about things to each other. But then the rest of these, you're seeing some pretty good penetration for some other ways that you can communicate with residents. Utility bills or invoice mailings, the City of Redmond website, which has changed over the past couple of years. But the full text there is the City of Redmond website. We actually list it, and we also list Let's Connect Redmond to people, so they actually see the two of those in that one. But a series of other ones that are getting a solid proportion of, anywhere from almost a quarter to a half saying some version of that are somewhat connected to the city, right? Then it drops off into community and neighborhood association meetings, which is not necessarily city run, and a couple of items here on the list, including where we are right now on TV. This question we've asked for many iterations of the survey. This was a strategic plan question where we're saying, do you agree or disagree that these should be the city's top priorities? This is listed for everyone, so they all see the same list. The agreement has stayed strong in the 80s+% almost every time we've asked it. So there's continuing agreement with this. I think it's kind of hard to disagree, but you might argue that with me. But the agreement here is really strong. The strongly agree this year is 52%. So we've got a majority even in the strongest possible category. We talk about intensity a little bit so far, but just to point that out, on this one, there's strongly and somewhat agree, right? So those are the two positive agree categories. And then strongly and somewhat disagree on the far right, only reaching 12%. But there's a way for you to understand intensity in the survey, right? The strongly agree means the most agreement that you could have on a question like this. Okay, now we're getting into some ratings for the city itself. This is actually pretty early. If you look at questions 6 through 10, this comes a lot before a lot of the other survey questions we've shown you so far. This is done on a scale of excellent, good, only fair, and poor. The don't know and not applicable the don't know is not offered. So we're not actually giving people that explicit option in the survey, but they can force that choice, right? They can actually do that by skipping one of these questions, which essentially registers either a don't know, or they can say not applicable to me, which means they don't know enough to answer the question. Once again, intensity comes into play here. So the excellent is the dark blue. The first way to compare this is to look at the excellent versus the poor, sort of the best rating and the worst rating, and look at where the balance of those two are. So overall, the city's got a total positive rating of 68%, excellent at 12, poor at 7. So those two, the excellent is a little bit better than the poor, but not dramatically so. However, on balance, 68% positive should feel pretty good to you. Plenty of other cities don't get that kind of rating. I think we asked this in Seattle, it would not be the same, it'd be far more negative. You look down the list, these are the questions that sort of roughly comprise how people are making up that decision. Obviously, there's more than just these, but these are the 4 that we've tracked over time that we feel are pretty important to how people think about you. Keeping community members informed regarding city programs, initiatives, projects, and issues. Look at the excellent to poor rating there. 25 excellent, 9% poor. So clearly a lot more intensity around this on the positive side. Another 40% good, getting to 65% total positive. So the first 3, all 2/3-ish positive ratings, and in the negative anywhere from about a quarter to a third in that area. But you can kind of get a sense of how that compares with the next 3. Delivering services effectively, 65% positive, 22% negative. The balance there again on the excellent side. Using tax dollars responsibly. This is actually a pretty difficult question on purpose. Right? We're asking people to sort of raise the bar on how they think the city is doing. So that tax dollar responsibility drops below 50%. It's still positive by 12, right? Intensity is a little bit higher on the poor side than it is on the excellent side. We're asking people to rate government here, right? What are we asking for in terms of a passing grade? We've sort of talked about this as that only fair feels like a C, right? And it's probably passing. It's not overly negative, but when you look at it that way, there's a couple different ways to construct the mention here. The other thing to note is the 20% who said not applicable. They didn't know how to answer this question, right? This is indicating, I don't know enough about the city to really pass a judgment on this. Right? So how would they rate it? It's hard to know because we gave them that option to opt out of that. Would they be positive, negative? Hard to know. And then finally, focusing on the priorities that matter most to community members, very similar to rating to the tax dollars responsibly, right? They're kind of in parallel with each other, almost to the same percentage in each of those. But this gives you a sense of how people are thinking about the city overall, right? We can walk away with a really good positive rating in some other places that we've seen lag behind, but also are tougher ways to rate the city that you would expect people to give a tougher grade on. They're still positive, although below a majority. One of the things we like to do, and this is one of the most powerful things you have going for you, is you've got longitudinal data going back all the way to 2014 to look at this and say, how have things changed over time? And I mentioned to you early at the outset that things have gotten better this year. And you can see that evidence here in 2025 that the city of Redmond's overall job rating at 68% essentially is matching close to the highest it's ever been. 68% positive, 26% negative. You'll notice sort of a pandemic crankiness effect here where the negative was actually below that, look, 18 and 19% back well before the pandemic, and it's been increasing and staying that high, even though we're looking at one of the highest positive ratings we've seen over the course of a tracking survey. 26% are still giving a negative rating. So there's a lot of sort of negativity still hanging around here among people, whereas don't know would have been, 13, 15% before. So we also like to do this over time for all these other ratings to give you a sense of what's been changing. Some of them are pretty stable. So the delivering services effectively over time has stayed really stable. Look at that line. You're looking at a line fit of, probably around, 68, high 60% margin, and the same for the only fair and poor ratings. Some of these other ratings have changed a lot. So keeping community members informed has had a seesaw effect. Looking at 2021, then back up in 2023, down again in 24, and back up in 25. So some really sort of rocky changes in people's own perception of how the community is informing them. Just to take a brief break here, if I think about how we've talked about this in the past, you've had some contentious issues in the city that people have dealt with. So I imagine if you correlated those, you might find there's quite a bit more contention around the times when those numbers have dropped. I would venture a guess because I've been here to talk about it, and we said, why has this number dropped? Well, we know some of the answers there. The same thing I think can be said for focusing on priorities that matter. You can see a big spike there one year, but otherwise it's sort of trading back and forth between the excellent, good, only fair and poor. Same thing with using tax dollars responsibly, sort of trade back and forth. But you notice both of those back in 2014, 11 years ago now, were both majority positive, and they stay that way. So the relationship between people and governments have also changed, I think. It's gotten more negative generally. So I think that's part of what's going on here that's driving this negativity while still remaining a plurality of people saying excellent or good. Okay. The next section here, with all of this sort of more positive news, we're taking a closer look at the city services and functions in detail. So all of these are offered to people. We're pretty, probably middle to the latter third of the survey at this point. All of these items are randomized for people. So they're not appearing in the same order for any person. I might get protecting the quality of drinking water first, and then I'm going to get Derby Days second. Right? And it appears differently for everybody. That's on purpose. We're trying to avoid as much bias as we can, so randomizing them ensures that we do that. This is asked on a 5-point scale, right, where 5 is extremely important, 1 is not important at all. Right? And so on that scale, we're then asking people, give me a score of that. Where would you put it? The closer to 5, the more important it is. So on this scale, you can see the extremely important percentage, the people that chose a 5, is listed in that blue at the far right. So you can see the first two, the extremely important percentage, 78 and 80% are giving it a 5, the highest rating they could. So clearly there is some intensity differences here. Because look at the bottom one, the 25 and 20% for recreation programs and community events, 20 and 25% extremely important, very different than the first two. Not to say it's not important, but the percentage of people saying it's extremely important is very different for those two than the first two. The other way to look at this is the mean score, right? If you're not into percentages, you want to just say, all right, give me an average. We'll take the mean and say that. So that's all the answers on the entire scale, then averaged out into say, where are you on that scale? And once again, seeing a pretty big gap between the top and the bottom. You can kind of draw your own, groupings there. So the first two kind of feel like they're close to each other, right? 4.8, 4.7. The next 4, 5, or 6, you could kind of group those two together. And the last 4, you can group them together as well. It gives you a sense of how people are looking at how important these items are. We start by asking the importance of these items. We then ask, how are we doing on them next? But I want to make sure letting you to sit with this for just a minute to look at how these rank. This is pretty similar to the ranking we've seen in the past. Not a big change in the priorities that you're seeing here, but some shifts right back and forth on the individual ratings between year over year. So if this is what's important, then the next question is, how are we doing? There is one item here that's always out of order. That's how is the city doing overall, right? And that mean rating there at 3.6, 15% very satisfied. Once again, the intensity comes into play, but this is more a stair step in terms of where you could see groupings before. This seems like a pretty, you can sort of draw a line. They're all moving in some direction where they're all separated from each other just a little bit. So if we're looking at this, what we're hoping for is that these items on the importance one that we're at the top are also here on the ones we're performing well on, right? That's the hope, is that we're doing really well on the things people really care about, and the things that people don't care as much about, or maybe we can give ourselves space to not do as well. You'll notice there are some differences here, and now I'm not going to ask you to compare both of those. I'll do it for you in a minute. But this can give you a sense of the overall rankings. And once again, I want you to pay attention to the very satisfied. If you look at how important stuff is, right, we're looking in the 60s, 70s, and 80s for the top ones. The very satisfied, we're looking at 45, 34%. So very different in terms of the overall intensity of what people are saying here. A lot of things in the 20 and 30% range in terms of very satisfied with that 5 rating on this scale. So to simplify this for you, what we do is we sort of measure this, and this is not a hard and fast rule of where you cut these lines. You might argue to me, we cut these lines a little differently. But the idea behind this is to say, okay, if we're performing well on something and it's important, where do those line up? So those top 3, we sort of drawn a line there. We are basically overperforming on those 3 items at the top, right? We are both, it's important enough to people and we're doing really well on them. So the combination of those 2 things shows you where those 3 are. The next set of these blue ones, where performance is comparable to importance. And then the last group is where we're kind of underperforming, the places where we could improve. And if you're looking at this list, you look at the bottom, obviously, there's things we can pat ourselves on the back for in the top section, but we always look at the bottom ones and say, how can we do better, right? So managing police services, maintaining public infrastructure and facilities, managing pedestrian and bike safety, and utilizing community feedback on priority project decision-making, which has been an item that has lagged actually in past surveys, although it has improved this year. So we'll look at that in a minute as well. But these are the places where essentially we're not doing as well. If you wanted to get dig into those further, let's just pick one and look at this. So managing police services, as an example, is the 5th item on this list. It's at a 4.5 mean in terms of overall importance. It's extremely important to nearly 70% of people who responded to this survey. When we then go to look at satisfaction on police services, if you're going to pick it out there, I think that's like the 7th or 8th item down. It's still on the positive side. So if we're looking at the mean score here, over 3 would indicate more satisfaction than dissatisfaction. The very satisfied is 23%. So get a sense of this. The managing police services, I think, is one that could be improved in that sense, right? If you're looking at it, especially compared to some of the other ones on this list. It's also one of the core services of the city. It's probably also the toughest thing you provide, I would imagine, right? Dealing with police issues and what's going on in the community. That gives you a sense of how to compare these. The other thing we did here was to look at the change in these, right? Between 24 and 25, how did this gap analysis change over time? There's only a couple places where either we're flat or the item went down in terms of the gap, right? So we want to see all these improve in some way, right? That means we are closing the gap in some sense. Even the one that was the weakest on this, utilizing community feedback, improved 8 points. So every one of these, even though you may look at this one and say, oh gosh, we have places to improve. Well, in fact, we did improve between 2024 and 2025 on all of these ratings, including police services, which went from 78 to 81. That's rounded, right? To get to 4%, it's like 3.7 or something like that. Obviously, that's also within the margin of error, if you've been paying attention. It's just below the margin of error, but it is an improvement. And the fact that we're seeing improvement throughout the rest of the survey suggests to me that that is in fact an actual improvement in these ratings. So I realize that's a lot of data to sort of think about how the city is being evaluated, but all these are what people are being asked, and when you put it this way, I think it's a little easier to understand where we can improve, but also that things are in fact improving. So we shouldn't walk out of this room thinking nothing has been done. The ratings have all improved in some way. The next section, before we close out, is all about public safety. We've been adding this since 2022, and so the first one here asks a very similar kind of excellent, good, only fair, and poor rating, also with that not applicable there in the middle, on the job Redmond Fire is doing and the job the Redmond Police Department is doing. The fire department is still, has always been in the 70+ % range in terms of positive, the negative a scant, 6, 3, or 1%, with the net positive there. So we're sort of doing the math of saying how much, if you take the total positive and the total negative, how much bigger is the total positive over the total negative, right? So you can see that math is happening there. We do the same thing for the Redmond Police Department. Those numbers are lower, but they're still, total positive is into the 60s for all of those ratings. A little bit lower than it was in 2022, where it was 69-17. The negative has not changed, really. What's changed is the non-applicable number, right? That's risen by about 5 points since 2022. And I think most of it's come out of the excellent or good ratings, right? You can see that that's the case there, because essentially that negative has stayed the same over time. So that gives you a sense of what's happening. But even here, the number overall has improved because at a net way, right, we had 24, 63-21 versus 62-18, there is in fact an improvement. Yes, it's within the margin of error, but it did improve a little bit. So that starts us out with the public safety section. We then have a question here that I believe goes in your strategic plan. It's something that you report on. We ask how safe do you feel in Redmond? That's on the left. How safe do you feel walking alone in your neighborhood? On the right. In 2024 versus 2025, like the rest of the survey, we're seeing an improvement in these numbers, just outside the margin of error, I think, or at the margin of error for 24 to 25 on how safe do you feel in the city, within the margin of error for how safe do you feel walking in your neighborhood. But the other change I want to draw your attention to is the intensity. You probably picked up on this already if you've been paying attention. Look at the total safe from 2024 at 32%, the very safe, to 40% in 2025 for how safe do you feel in the city of Redmond. So overall, while the total number didn't change all that much, most of it, in fact, the vast majority of it went into the very safe, right? So that's changed fundamentally between 24 and 25. The same thing happened, how safe do you feel walking in your neighborhood, although not as dramatic, right? There's a 3-point difference, which again is within that margin of error. But both of them have improved, and the unsafe has dropped a few points more in the case of how safe do you feel in Redmond, a little bit less, and how safe do you feel walking alone in your neighborhood. So, but both have improved in some way. To summarize things, I'd be happy to take your questions. So, as I mentioned, ratings have in fact improved in most areas that we measured between 24 and 25. Some of them returned to what we've seen in pre-pandemic levels on many of the city's core functions. We have found that affordability continues to be a really important concern, and one of the top mentioned priorities that residents think the city should focus on over the next couple of years. Growth and development is also increasing. You recall that on the east side, growth and development was a big concern. In fact, some cities put growth and building moratoriums out. So we are not there yet, but we sort of are. If you think of that trend as continuing, we might be back on our way to that. Ratings of the job the city does, focusing on priorities that matter and using tax dollars responsibly, those have both improved. In 24, we saw drops in there. We're sort of wondering what's happening there. The share of residents that say the city is keeping communities informed has risen, and the utilization of the Redmond Focus newsletter clearly up. But utilizing community feedback continues to be one of the areas for the most improvement, right? The one that was sort of at the lowest, how important it is and how well we're performing on the item. The final set of slides here are really just demographics, which show you who we talk to. Looks pretty similar to what you would see for census in the city of Redmond, the best information we have. But it gives you a sense of who we talk to in case you were curious about what the details of the survey were. I will stop there and see if there are questions that I can answer.
Thank you so much. Questions from the council? Councilmember Salahuddin.
Thank you. And I apologize if I'm slurring. My permanent retainer, there's a loose wire in my mouth right now, so it broke. So the demographics we saw indicate the home ownership, the percent owning. I think the census data in Redmond is actually flipped, where about 60% of people rent, 60% of residents rent. And then in looking at how we're sending the survey just by paper copy, and then with the code on the back, and looking at how people tend to get their news from the city of Redmond, it's also a mail format, is the Redmond or magazine. And so is there capacity, or will we ever, look towards more digital outreach platforms? Say, if we sent an email, would that question change on how people are receiving their information more so geared towards emails? Just in questions around where people are checking their mail versus how this surveys.
I think it's a good question to ask. One of the challenges with digital is that we don't necessarily know who we're talking to when we do that. So we've avoided adding those generally because it tends to skew it. But every survey methodology has a hole in it, right? And so the question is, where can we fill it in? At least for the last few years, this ABS approach was the preferred one. But I can see your point that we might think about adding other ways. I know that the city also opens up the survey to anyone to respond at the end digitally. So that's another way that's more of a inclusion than it is a statistical projection. So, and I believe you have those results. I'm not sure if you're talking about them, but.
I can share them with council if you're interested, but we did have a low turnout for this year. There was 100 respondents on the digital end, which I think is a couple of few hundred, somewhere between 200 and 300 less than years past.
And just to continue that, one of the challenges that survey researchers always face, and it's a question more of budget than anything else, how much are we going to put into reaching people who are hard to reach, right? Because by definition, they're hard to reach. And so if we're going to get to them, we have to spend more to do it. And so that is certainly a possibility. Lots of other surveys do enhance it with, text messages or lots of other ways you could involve people. That's something worth considering.
Thank you. Councilmember Nova Camina.
Thank you, Chair. And that was in alignment with the question that I had. So thank you, Councilmember Salahuddin, for bringing that up. Is that to get a better turnout, because we're ballpark around 85,000 plus or minus respondents was in between 400 and 600 people that were participating in this. Our average age in the city is right around 35, 33, 35. So thinking about generationally, how people are interacting, where are they getting their mail? To Councilmember Salahuddin's point, how are they getting their mail? How do they interact? If they are hard to reach, and I hesitated on that because it's hard for us with our current systems to reach them, but that does not mean that they're actually hard to reach. It just means that we need to adapt our current systems to be able to do that. And how then would that be reflected inside of both participation and the data that we get at that point? So just interesting in how do we adapt to a very quickly changing city?
Yeah. And technology, it introduces lots of challenges with this. One of the things that we're doing in some other places, we send text messages to residences that sometimes do that. But again, that's also introducing a bias because what list did they come from? But there are options that we could do that would help with some of this. It's not going to solve the issue because, we use hard to reach as you said, it's not exactly the right fit. But in the industry, in the research industry, that's how we talk about it because they're younger, they're lower income, they move a lot, right? There's lots of reasons that it's difficult to get them to participate in a survey. So, but certainly there are tools we could employ that would help with that.
Thanks.
Councilmember Fields?
Thank you, Council President. Do I get to ask 3 questions, or can I only ask one?
Ask one, and then you'll get the second round.
So I've lived in Redmond initially in 1976. Then I was gone. I came back in 86. So I've watched, the city change quite a bit. And then there was this period of time where infrastructure or level of services was really degrading. And over the past 2 budget cycles, 4 years, I've said this before at the end of the budget, I really feel like that the mayor and the council paid very close attention to catching up on infrastructure, and even our roads are starting to improve. As I've said too many times, I ride a motorcycle around Redmond. It's very scary, but it's less scary now because the roads are starting to be pretty welcoming. So I was looking through this data for that kind of thing, but as you start to experience physical things, more safety on bicycles, more safety in cars, more, things working better, parks are growing. We've added facilities and parks, upgrading some of our facilities. Doesn't that have an impact on how people feel overall? Isn't there sort of a tagging along effect that makes them feel safer, that makes them feel more happy with services? And I don't know how to interpret any of that data, but wouldn't there be that sort of effect?
I think that's a reasonable conclusion to make. Whether it's responsible for all the positive change, I don't know. I mean, there's so many things that go into that overall rating. Looking here at, I was trying to, as you were just saying, can we search for something in here? Infrastructure does register at 6 points, but that's so generic. I mean, there's so many things in there, right? There's going to be stop signs. There's going to be street lights. There's going to be buildings and things.
Well, I think part of the reason I asked the question is because, like on do you feel safe? Nothing really changed dramatically that I know of. I know that there was some what I would consider organized crime using young people, and then we did some multi-jurisdictional investigations and caught some people, but I don't know that would really translate into that much of a change in public safety. It hasn't changed that dramatic. So I'm just wondering, what would cause people to feel better on things that, and the natural beauty one struck me too. It's always sort of been a beautiful place to live. So why would all of a sudden did that go up?
So I think the best answer I have on the crime answer is that if you look at national trends and regional trends, crime was definitely on the rise the last few years. Like people's concern, wherever you ask that question, crime was increasing. And I actually think if you look at the statistics, crime has dropped off sort of across the West Coast. And so that's part of what's happening here is that regionally there's less concern with it. I don't know if this is as strong a connection, but we did focus groups for the city. Probably, I don't think, 2 years before light rail opened, there were definitely concerns people are expressing of, I don't know if this is going to affect crime, because it feels like it's a connection to the outside world in a way we haven't had before, right? Before, people would have to drive into the city to do something. How's that going to change? And I think it's been proven that that's actually not a concern anymore. So that might have been a, what's going to happen? Oh, it's fine, right? So, but these are guesstimates. We don't really know from the data whether those two are driving it. I do think the national trend is an easier one to spot and say that probably is something that regionally, it's also been, crime is down as a concern kind of all over. So I think that's part of what's happening here.
Great. Thank you.
Council Vice President Forsyth?
Thank you. My comment had more along the lines of my fellow colleagues over here. I was looking at the same rental versus homeownership data and also looking at the ethnicity data that we had in response, and just kind of understanding that it's not necessarily quite the makeup of our community, and wondering how we can do a better job of getting it to be more representative ethnicity-wise as well.
Yeah, I think we've covered some of the ways that we could go in next year. Obviously, we adopted this same methodology that we've had the last couple of years. We kept the same budget. So but that's certainly a discussion we can have about what could we do.
Great. Yeah, I think we're just a little off. I understand that the results might not change terribly much, especially the housing rental one is kind of within that 4.2%. But the ethnicity one is a bit more off. So whatever we can do to ensure that we're getting that wider feedback.
Yeah. You're not alone in
Yeah.
trying to do this.
sure.
Every city and municipality is like, how do we do this? And it's always a balance of how much are we going to spend on this particular thing to
Right.
reach as many people as we can.
Yeah.
And then we say, all right, where's the line we're going to draw? So,
Thanks.
Thank you. And I'll just add, we did several years ago change our methodology, because I remember we used to use the voter file, or you used voters, and then the council was interested in reaching residents, voters and non-voters. So it wouldn't be unprecedented to add some more methodology, right?
it would make perfect sense if times have changed, technology has changed. So why not?
Great. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you being here again and doing this work for us. A couple thoughts for my colleagues first, and then a question for Mr. Stewart. On the renter question and the renter majority question, as well as just the opportunity to use this survey as an evaluation of our communication and engagement in the city. The council has, over the last couple of budget cycles, discussed the possibility of entertaining some kind of programming that would support new folks moving to Redmond, introduce them to Redmond, get them engaged in Redmond earlier from the start. Perhaps there's some amount of engagement that is also being measured here by our newest residents, and that's something I've spoken about a bit before. I'm really excited to see the newsletter, the print newsletter, continue to score very highly. Remember that we pointed this out a couple years ago because the newsletter had been reduced during the pandemic, and so to see that come back up is really great. Print is not dead, and I'm glad that Kelly is here for my annual reminder that the way to keep that newsletter strong and performing this well is to keep the quality really strong. I think that it's an opportunity for some of the areas of improvement for us that were in this study were the listening and creating more engagement opportunities, and there's room in the newsletter to do that too, so that when you get the newsletter, you're not just getting announcements, you're not just getting news, but you're getting a way to get engaged. So I'm hopeful for that. Ian, I have one more data question for you. Particularly, I think that my colleagues have addressed the how many people do we need in our growing city to have a statistically valid survey. My kind of refined question on that is by region. I don't remember the east and west of downtown, so I don't know if that was new this year, but what stuck out to me in that delineation that you used was we have 3 urban centers that are going to house most of our growth moving forward. So instantly I'm kind of like, okay, well, this center is over here, and this center is over here, and this has this long traditional neighborhood, this one may not. So there's nuance in there that I'm trying to dissect as I look at that number. But the question really being, how many responses from each side of that do you need, or how many responses might we need in order to actually have that by neighborhood eventually, right? How much more response would we have to have in order for that to be a valid assessment?
Yeah, there's 2 answers. Usually when you look at any subgroup, you want to be at least 100, if not more, because the margin of error from again, we're not perfect, but perfect sampling, we never get that. But if it were, the margin of error would be around 10 points at 100 interviews. So, even here, we saw a big enough change in one question to do that. But as a small aside, we might be able to redo geographies if you wanted to look at this a different way, right? Because we have the data to be able to say, let's rearrange it in those three groupings that you just talked about. I don't know how they would look balance-wise, so that's one of the challenges here. Downtown is a smaller population set, but we certainly have the data, probably can reconfigure if you're interested. But 100 is probably right. But one of the questions to think about is what sort of, can we track the response rate to something? So the challenge becomes whenever we open up digital tools even wider, we don't know necessarily where people are coming from. And so we're susceptible to anyone sort of manipulating the response. I don't know why someone would want to do that in this instance, but people do all kinds of crazy stuff. So one of the challenges in opening things up is how do we expand that sample set and not challenge the statistical validity of the approach.
Mayor Bernie?
Okay, thank you. I also, I'll talk with Ian's team and your team about, because we don't talk about Redmond in those the way those neighborhoods. And so maybe we'll take a look at the data. It could be urban centers and not urban centers, might be an interesting slicing and dicing, or, something like that, because we have so many neighborhoods, and I think some of the neighborhoods probably had very little return rate. So we'll take a look at it, because I agree, that was, when I saw that, I was like, I don't know really what that is. That's not how we talk about things.
Back to your original question, more is always better. One of the limiting factors in this survey is sending stuff to people, right? Postage is not cheap like it used to be, unfortunately, right? One of the reasons the address-based sampling approach became the gold standard is that postage was pretty cheap, and you could reach everybody, and you could get 98% coverage. That's changing, right? Postage is, mostly because postage is expensive. And so I would always say get the biggest sample size we can, but we have to balance those two things. So, but there's clearly something we can talk about here that might allow us to change some things next year.
Thank you. I'm not seeing other hands, so Councilmember Fields, back to you.
Still only one, not two.
Feel free to ask both, unless anyone else is second round.
So I was struck by, in your importance chart, helping people who in need, and that scored fairly low on the, where is it?
It's in the blue tier there, the last one in the blue tier in this chart.
Providing services for people in need.
Yep.
From an importance perspective, it was low when affordability was very high. And yes, it's a little bit abstract, but the two are certainly related. The lack of affordability creates more people who need assistance. And I don't want to keep piling on to ways to improve your survey. I mean, I think you've got plenty of questions on that. But I am wondering and maybe suggesting if, when we do this again, so people who aren't in need may not be thinking about it. It's not on their minds every day, right? It's traffic that's on their mind. They're not really thinking about their neighbors who are struggling to stay in their homes, or struggling to feed their kids, or struggling to, take their kids to medical treatment. But I think it would be helpful if we can zero down in the next survey to, and I don't know how you do that. Maybe there's a few preceding questions so that we know the people who are in that sort of category who need help, how well do they think we're doing, as opposed to everybody.
One thought on that question, I don't think that a lot of people necessarily think of, how do I phrase this? The question of helping and providing services to people in need. The city of Redmond is a good-sized city, but it's not Seattle, and it's not King County, where there's millions of people, 800,000 people, and there's sort of a consistent, there's a set of programs that are out there. I'm not sure how many people think of Redmond as having programs in the same fashion, right? When I think about East Side cities, and that's obviously changing now, but when a lot of people think about city functions, it's make sure my street's safe, provide me police and municipal court services, right? There's sort of a basic version of that, and then it gets more complex as you get bigger and bigger. So one of my questions is I wonder how many people even know that the city's offering any services. That's the first thing. And so I think that's to your point, which is like, if people don't know,
Right.
then we should be asking them, like, are you aware this thing is out there, and how do you think we're doing on it?
Yeah, that's exactly to my point, and that's been sort of a myth on the east side for a long, long time, a couple of decades at least, that we don't have people who are very serious and very vulnerable of not being able to meet their basic survival. So we do have people in our city. We do have people on the east side that are suffering and need help. No question. You can talk to anybody in our Health and Human Services side of our department, and they're definitely going to let you know that. So if we can zero that, we can flesh that out, I think that would be amazing. So that's all I've got on that. My second question is, yes, I think that the Focus newsletter is important, but it's mostly happy stuff. And without the, remember op-eds? A long time ago when we used to have newspapers, we don't really have a way to give people a voice on a structured basis, other than coming here to items from the audience and telling us how they feel. We don't reach out and we let them know all the good things that we're doing. We let them know all our successes, but we don't really give voice to the things where we're not so successful and we've potentially even failed. So I don't know if that's something that we can do, blend into the Focus newsletter, or we have some other way of doing it. But trying to sort of balance the scale here, I think, would be really important. And I know that's not your decision, but if you have any comments on that, that'd be appreciated.
Mayor Bernie?
I just want to actually correct that. We do reach out to the community a lot. There are many opportunities for people to give us feedback, both positive and negative, on an ongoing basis. The survey is just one touch in time. And I think Lisa can talk a little bit about some of the outreach that we do on different programs with our online format and things like that. Do you want to share a little bit of kind of the ongoing things we have?
Sure. I think I was sharing before the meeting a little bit with Councilmember Fields about we're doing the most outreach that I have seen the city do in a couple of decades. But yet you still see we're missing some folks, obviously, we know that. And people are saying still that we are not using their feedback to make our decisions as strongly as we could. I relate that a little bit to us not doing a good job, or we need to do a better job of sharing. We heard you. This is what we heard you say. And when we don't, when our decision differs from what we may have heard from the majority of the community, we don't explain why. So we're saying, yes, we listened to you, we heard you, and here's the decision that was made and why. I have a gut feeling that that interprets itself into you're not listening to me. Because a lot of times if things don't go your way, you're like, well, I wasn't heard. So I feel like we could do a better job with all of the platforms that we are engaging with the community, including Focus, of explaining why the whys, why a decision was made, how a decision was made. I don't, budget-wise, capacity-wise, staff-wise, we are doing a lot of outreach, as well as you are, as a council as well. So that's the only thing I can kind of come to, is that we need to share more, and I guess, that maybe doesn't translate to the things that we made a mistake in, but it does translate to we're not going to go the direction you necessarily wanted us to go, and here's why. So just my thought on that.
Thank you. And I guess I would note also that I think it's a very rare instance in which we actually make a decision that a majority have told us that they don't want. Most of the time we make our decisions based on what a majority wants, but we may still hear negative feedback from the people who weren't in the majority that had a differing opinion. So I do think that is an interesting question, and because it may be that it's not the mass outreach, because I think even like Redmond 2050, for example, I know we did a bunch of communication sharing the thousands of people and the stats on kind of the different ways we got people to weigh in. We had community-based organizations sharing about all these different things, but we still heard from some people that said, I shared this thing and I didn't see it in there, right? And so, how do we, with those people who gave feedback, I guess, get back to them, where it may not be like the mass tool, it may be some other tool. So I appreciate you thinking about that. Councilmember Nueva Camina.
Thank you. And sticking on that note, how I'd like to make sure we're continuing the conversation, because for me, it comes down to accountability, whether it's positive or negative, whether it went in the favor of the majority or not, or I think however we can explore continuing to build the relationship with the community, with our residents. And a lot of that is, it comes down to building trust, and how can we do that? So for me, when I hear about, here's the reason why, my brain just says, well, that's just giving an account for the decision that we made. And I think that that's just good business all the way around. So in whatever ways that we can explore, continuing to build that trust and nurture the relationship.
Thank you. Actually, I'll just add one more thought on this, which is that I think one of the things that we probably are all aware of is when we do make a big decision, when we're getting ready to make a big decision, that being kind of prepared to do advanced communications about that decision is important, especially ones that there may be a lot of information that gets out in the community about it. We've certainly seen some examples in the last couple of years, and maybe around the time we did the survey last year, there was quite a bit of misinformation out there about some stuff that was going on. And I think that was a learning, was how we kind of get ahead of it when we have some of these big decisions coming up, and can get out to our community to share about that and about how they can engage with us on the process for those decisions. Any other comments or questions? All right, well, thank you so much. I think that brings us to the end of this item. Really appreciate this work, and we'll look forward to seeing you again next year.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
The next item on our agenda is the Transportation Master Plan status update. I'm going to pause for a moment while we do a little staff transition here and pull the PowerPoint down. So coming up to join us is some of our wonderful planning staff, and I will have Sarah Fee Allen, our Planning and Community Development Deputy Director, introduce this item. Go ahead.
Thank you and good evening. This study session will provide an opportunity to continue our discussions of the Transportation Master Plan with a focus on the pedestrian network and our transportation demand management chapters, as well as an overview of our community engagement process topic we were just talking about. Staff will provide an update on the TMP progress and timeline for remaining milestones, and also give highlights for the chapters to come. Staff present tonight include Transportation Planning Manager Michael Hintz and Senior Transportation Planner Francesca Liberti. I'll now hand it over to Francesca to begin.
All right. Great. Okay. Yeah. Oh, is it on? Okay. Sorry about that. All right. Today we're going to review the Transportation Demand Management chapter, as well as our Pedestrian Network chapter and our community engagement process, as Seraphy mentioned. First, I'll quickly review our overall schedule. We're on track for TMP adoption in Q1 of 2026. And as a reminder, we pushed out this timeframe to allow for more time for some detailed content review. I'll start with our Transportation Demand Management, or TDM, chapter. So Transportation Demand Management, TDM, as we're informally calling it, is a general term for strategies that result in a more efficient and sustainable use of transportation resources. Many programs and projects within TDM aim to provide more competitive transportation options than driving alone in order to reduce trips and improve traffic congestion. The TDM chapter in our Transportation Master Plan focuses on reducing all vehicle traffic within Redmond, not just drive-alone trips, through encouraging transit and active transportation modes. Building out Redmond's infrastructure, such as our bicycle network, our pedestrian network, our transit network, and really what the focus is of our modal chapters that we've presented so far, is also a key component of TDM and provides the systems needed for people to choose alternative travel methods versus driving. I'll now talk about a few of our communication tools. This was a question that came up at our committee meeting last week. So Go Redmond is the city's TDM program that supports state commute trip reduction, or CTR, requirements. Go Redmond manages the school pool program to support reduction of traffic in school zones. And Go Redmond educates the community on their non-driving travel choices. Go Redmond spreads awareness of transit and non-driving resources, including recent transit network changes and flexible transit options in Redmond. The Go Redmond website was recently updated, and the branding was also refreshed to be more user-friendly and intuitive for community members who are looking for transportation resources. So this is a great place for finding information on how to get around in Redmond. With the completion of the Redmond 2050 Comprehensive Plan, planning efforts within Redmond will begin to shift focus to neighborhood plans to ensure that the non-urban center neighborhoods in the city are also effectively prepared to grow. Redmond neighborhoods are going to see growth and an increase in travel demand, and maintaining acceptable travel times and expanding travel options is an important factor for the community. TDM will play a key role in these neighborhood planning efforts to ensure that these transportation corridors and neighborhood networks are safe and accessible for a variety of travel modes. Other efforts in the TDM realm include our parking management studies and our on-demand shuttle and shared parking program that will be implemented through the regional mobility grant that we've discussed here before. These programs will continue to encourage non-drive-alone transportation options. I'll now pause for any questions on our TDM chapter before moving on to the pedestrian network chapter.
Questions from the council? Councilmember Stewart?
Well, I just have a couple of comments. I really appreciate the emphasis on making sure that the plans are going to be integrated into the neighborhood plans where we're headed on the next step. I think that's, for a long time, the council and the city have heard from residential neighbors that they can't wait to get access to light rail, right? And that they're going to want to be able to do that in a more comfortable and timely way too. So I do appreciate that. I also really appreciate in strategy number 5, the emphasis on needing to strengthen the relationship with the schools in the school zone, the safety school zones, and the management of the traffic and transportation network there. And I would just say, I think that some amount of the council is scheduled in the fall to meet with the school board, and this would be just something for the members of our council who do go to that meeting to continue to be good ambassadors of this with. Thanks.
Councilmember Forsyth?
Thanks. I'm not sure if this is the right section for this. I'm just going to ask it anyway. I remember at one point I'd brought up a question about bike storage, and this feels like it's kind of right because it's a transportation, we're managing all of those different modes of transportation. So I didn't see a huge nexus on that. Can you talk to that at all?
Yeah, I'll jump in on that. I think that's a good highlight, that it would be, typically bike storage would be and has been in some of the code requirements that we have through agreements with developers. It could be something that we think about adding as an action that we're tracking as part of transportation demand management. We also are working on bike storage with some of the hoteliers, so I think that's a good comment and something we can take into consideration, unless you think that there's somewhere else that it's been mentioned, Mike.
I'll just add that, TDM is transportation demand management is very broad in its scope. We're talking about more of the programmatic aspects of it here. But, providing infrastructure is a form of TDM. And we do talk extensively about bike storage in the bike chapter. And, we'll be looking at ways to kind of cross-reference this information. The TDM chapter in particular has a lot of touch points with other chapters, just because it's such a broad topic.
Got it. So just to reflect on why that came up, I had been in a conversation with someone from One Redmond about tourism and bringing more tourism, and having the conversation of, like, we both got very excited about how Portland has bikes at the hotels, so you can grab them and go for a ride and get from A to B. And she was talking about tourism on our trails and how that could relate. So it just kind of sparked that part of this conversation for me, just for context.
I was just going to add that actually Councilmember Fields is going to get the pleasure about hearing a pilot project that we're working on at the LTAC committee tomorrow afternoon that Nick, who's back here, is working on right now with our hotels. So using some of the LTAC funds to do bike storage for kind of that purpose.
Councilmember Fields.
Well, I was going to say that, so thank you. Not a problem. No, and yes, this is one of the things that I think the LTAC is very happy to pilot. I think it's a $40,000 program working with the hotelers. And I agree with you, Councilmember Forsyth, it needs to be really expanded and dealt with very seriously, because I think that's what's going to encourage people, which leads to my question, actually. What do you think it's going to take? I remember Councilmember Anderson used to ask this question all the time. What would it take to get you out of your car? So there's a cultural shift here. It's pretty deep in our psyche that we jump in our car and go because it's easy. But what do you believe it will take from a education perspective, from an encouragement perspective, from an incentivizing perspective, to actually get people to look seriously at alternatives to single occupancy vehicle driving around, going to Trader Joe's or whatever they do?
Yeah, I mean, everybody wants to go to Trader Joe's, right? I mean, you're right, it's a big cultural shift. I think it's about making alternative modes to driving really intuitive and really easy. That bus ride or that Lime scooter or that bike in your garage or, on the corner, shared bike share, needs to be as easy as getting into your car, and where you're taking it to needs to have the infrastructure in place so that you can do that. And I think until we get to the point where those options, and we're getting there, where those options become just as easy as getting in your car, and where people know about the options that are just as easy as getting in your car, and until we get to that level of awareness, then we still have work to do.
Yeah, and one thing, by the way, when you go on light rail in the downtown Redmond, for somebody smaller than me, even just by a few inches, it's really difficult to hang an electric bike on those hooks. That was a bad design. Somebody who didn't understand, where we're at with electric bikes and the size of people. So those kinds of things matter, those small details. And when we do these kinds of encouraging, incentivizing things, we need to really think that through. So just a thought.
I will just add, Councilmember Fields, that's one of the reasons why we applied for the regional mobility grant, and thinking about the shuttle that we're trying to have is trying to create as many reasons to, hey, you don't need, if you park far away, you'll be able to have a shuttle. It's going to come around in 10 minutes to bring you to the downtown station. Hey, and so trying to meet a lot of those questions, or all the reasons why people might choose to, again, want to focus on being able to take a single occupancy trip.
Councilmember Anderson.
Well, since you stole my saying, the thing that comes to mind when I hear about how we need to make things easier, we actually need to make driving more expensive, or
clarify how much it costs in time and money. And that, I think the city could do a lot of communication on that, just because we have the information, we have the expertise, and we can share that with the community and say, these are your choices, and hey, this is what you're paying in the city of Redmond for driving a car instead of riding a bike. And here's all these great accessories that we have in, basically available space for you to recreate or commute or whatever. So I think that would be really helpful information, and to sort of reframe that, what our role would be to share this information and encourage people. It's not just about providing it, it's very difficult for us to be specific about what it is that we're doing that makes things easier. It would be much more compelling to discuss with the community that you're spending a lot of money on transportation, and here's what you're doing. Here's some other options and alternatives for you. I personally think that would be really helpful. You can have a car and you can have a bike in Redmond, but some people don't. And we also know that the generation coming into the city is less likely to drive. That's why we're thinking about TOD, but in terms of understanding community needs and what we really would like people to be thinking about, I think if we start talking in terms of how much it costs, and might really help, because they can also understand how much time they save by light rail. They can read a book or do something else. So I think that would be really helpful information. I would appreciate that too. Thank you.
I think that's a great suggestion. I wanted to add that's part of why we had parking management as part of transportation demand management. We'll be coming back to you later with the parking conversation, and I think cities are getting more real with what the real cost is for our right-of-way and for those uses, and so I think that's definitely a part of the conversation, and I think that's a great suggestion for how we do some of our messaging, not just here's the flexibility, but here's also some of the costs.
Other questions or comments? Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you so much. I guess one of the things that I noticed when I was reading these two chapters is that we have seen enough of these chapters now that we're starting to see how they're going to weave together, and so some of this is going to be really obvious. But in this most recent conversation, it's almost, to me, like if you wanted a through line under strategy 1 of this chapter, one of the recommended actions could be have really successful regional growth centers. We have been studying them at the Puget Sound Regional Council's Growth Management Board, and we're preparing, of course, for the certifications and the like that are coming up. But folks who live in regional growth centers drive alone half as much as folks who live outside of them. And so that is a core strategy of our overall plan here in Redmond, and you could have a through line here to that if you wanted to in this part, but maybe it's said enough otherwise throughout the plan. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll add to this conversation, then I do have a quick other comment that I think also it's mentioned in strategy 4 about wayfinding, but I think some of the wayfinding work that I know that our Parks and Trails Commission has been looking at and just ongoing, especially as we're on the biking infrastructure, like thinking about our plan to be able to create that low traffic stress routes that spine throughout Redmond, that the wayfinding link to that, and I don't know if we need to call that out a little bit more specifically, is really important. Like actually even just getting around on our current routes that we have, for example, for biking, I hear from people sometimes saying it's so hard to bike on Redmond Way, but actually if you go just a few blocks up and you bike all the way across 85th to get through downtown, you can bike in a pretty nice bike lane. It's not separated, but it is very well marked versus, biking on Redmond Way is kind of scary because there isn't a great bike lane there, right? And so having, some sort of map or way that would be easy for our community to be able to say, okay, if I'm going through downtown, here's the routes, which Google does some of that, but if there's ways to direct people to know, like there are ways that you want to navigate some of these spaces, not every single street is going to have it, but there's going to be a way for you to get through, and this is the way to go. Maybe I think important for encouraging this, not only to build the infrastructure, but to make it easy to access. And then the question I had for you, I think, which I had brought up, I don't quite see it in here that I'm wondering about if there's any way to add any more emphasis on this, is around how we gather feedback and then adapt or feed that back to Metro as we see updates on bus routes and how we, because I think not only being able to communicate with people about the routes and what's coming, but I see as Eastlink, I think I've said this a couple times, but I just wanted to bring it up because you said this is the night for it, that like, as we look at Eastlink connections rolling out, there may be some routes that people have legitimate feedback on that they say, this is not working, or this is a big miss, right? And I think we need to have something in this plan to be able to gather from our community the feedback and then identify how we plan to feed that back to Metro, because no one's going to give that feedback to Metro if we don't. We're going to be the best conduit as the city, and even in conversations with Metro about this, with East Side Transportation Partnership, they've said, we'd rely on the city to be able to aggregate things and then come to us at the right points when we do our update on service plans, right? But I think it is on us to have in our plan some sort of thing to be able to gather that feedback and make sure that we have the adaptation ability. Is that in here and I'm missing it?
So, Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we would put that in the transit chapter, which we're still working on. We've had study sessions on the different sections, and we're still working on revising those chapters. But maybe you want to speak to whether we have that addressed or whether we need to make sure.
Yeah, I remember your comment from last week on that, and I think I misinterpreted it at the time, and now it's crystal clear. I think you're right. I think that'd be a great action to put in, either in this chapter or the transit chapter, to look at ways we can gather that feedback on transit service and how it's working for people, so that we can provide that back. Right now we have, Go Redmond is our platform for pushing out information, and we already have all that information about Eastlink connections and when the different phases are rolling out on the Go Redmond site. But it's that mechanism for getting the feedback on how that's working.
Thank you. Also, because I think we may have to gather the data ourselves and feed it back to Metro, because they always work. It seems like they work often on data that exists, and we end up with the chicken egg problem sometimes for getting transit service, where they put service in places where they see that there's been demand. And I think with our pilot, for example, that's going to be really helpful for us to be able to share some of that data with them, so that way they may give us the service, since we can say we'll have the demand, but otherwise we get kind of caught in that issue.
Yeah, and again, that's why we actually added a transit chapter to the TMP, which we haven't had historically, because we've recognized if we don't do it, it's not going to happen in the same kind of way, because Metro is looking at our region. And so I think we've taken a first step, and this is good action items for us to add.
Thank you. All right, not seeing other hands up. Let's go to the next.
Okay, so we're going to discuss the pedestrian chapter, which outlines strategies for promoting connectivity and safe pedestrian access throughout Redmond. Just do want to note and be clear that this chapter acknowledges that the term walking refers to people walking, but also rolling, and wheelchairs and strollers and other mobility devices, and the term pedestrian refers to any individual walking or rolling. So we're being very inclusive in this chapter. So I want to start just with some of the questions you had last week at the committee meeting. There were a number of questions around lighting, accessibility, and traffic calming. So I'll just speak a bit about pedestrian lighting, and incidentally, this is definitely something that's come up a lot in our outreach. In the focus groups that we did recently this spring, that was definitely one of the top items, was lighting, particularly at transit stops and at pedestrian crossings are a really high priority for people. But also, I think there was questions around lighting of trails, and I think, there's this need, and the plan acknowledges this need to really balance the sort of safety and personal security with also in the environment. And so it's kind of a not one size fits all approach, and then we look at particularly our trails on a case-by-case basis, because there's some areas where, like on the Sammamish River Trail, that's pretty sensitive habitats, and you might not want to provide lighting there. But on the other hand, the Redmond Central Connector, very well-traveled trail, does have lighting, and so it's a case-by-case basis. Yeah, so I guess that's all to say on that topic. The plan does kind of acknowledge that need to sort of balance priorities when it comes to lighting, but safety is the priority. In terms of accessibility, I think we've mentioned this before, and you're aware that it's in the budget to develop an ADA transition plan. And this transition plan will get started in Q1 of 2026. And it's really going to focus on collecting field data on the condition of current city facilities, and then evaluate and prioritize the removal of any barriers that do exist out there. So it will look at sidewalks, curb ramps, push buttons that signals, accessible pedestrian signals, and the like. And yeah, and then it will come up with an estimate of cost and a timeline for getting our entire system up to ADA accessibility. And I will just say that right now, Public Works is busy kind of evaluating existing data that we have. I think somebody mentioned, they were shocked at the number of non-compliant curb ramps. We're validating that data currently, because that may or may not be totally accurate. But nonetheless, in the ADA transition plan, we'll definitely drill down and focus on those that are non-compliant and come up with a plan and a time frame for addressing those. So excited to get that work going next year. And then traffic calming. So just, I think we've mentioned this before and you're aware of it. Public Works, again, is going to be leading a citywide speed study. Part of that speed study is looking at or coming up with an implementation plan for reducing speeds on local streets, neighborhood streets, from 25 to 20 miles per hour, and kind of what it would take to do that. And of course, traffic calming is a big component of that work. From the Transportation Master Plan point of view, we've identified bicycle boulevards as part of the low-stress bike network, and also sidewalk alternatives, which I'll touch on here shortly. These would be priority streets for traffic calming, and I think we really want to take a data-driven approach to applying traffic calming measures, and certainly take community requests into account, but not have those be the primary driving factor for implementing traffic calming. Okay, moving on. Also wanted to just touch on a few other sort of important aspects in the pedestrian chapter that I just want to make sure you're all aware of, and I think is really quite exciting. We have a strategy around low stress pedestrian crossings. And Redmond has many pedestrian crossings. Some are marked with striped crosswalks. Some are not. Every intersection is a legal pedestrian crossing, whether it's marked or unmarked, unless it's signed not to cross there. However, a low stress pedestrian crossing is typically consists of other features, signals. Signalized intersections are called considered low stress, where we have crossings with rapid flashing beacons or what we call hawk signals. Those are considered low stress. Roundabouts are considered low stress. Always stop intersections are considered low stress. So we conducted an analysis of all the pedestrian crossings in the city and identified where there are gaps greater than 600 feet where there's not a low-stress crossing, and then identified and prioritized where we should put in new low-stress crossings. So that's what that map shows on the screen. And yeah, so this is going to guide guide the city's work going forward in terms of addressing and providing more opportunities to cross the street at comfortable crossings. And Councilmember Nueva Camina, you had a question just about, I think you termed it as like having clear views at intersections. We often refer to that as sight lines. And that is a part of this work as well, is making sure that there's no obstructions that would impede line of sight between intersecting users. So that's a big part of creating safe and comfortable crossings. In some cases, like where there's on-street parking, it may require so-called daylighting the intersection, which means pulling parking back from the intersection to open up those sight lines. And there's other strategies to really improve those sight lines at intersections. Okay, want to talk about sidewalk alternatives. So there's quite a few streets, mostly local neighborhood streets, that do not have sidewalks in Redmond. Fortunately, we're doing quite well on the arterials. We have really good sidewalk covers. There's still a few gaps here and there, but it's really the local streets where we have the most gaps. And in a lot of cases, those gaps exist because of environmental constraints, or it's just not really feasible to build a sidewalk, or it's quite costly. So we wanted to introduce this idea of sidewalk alternatives in the Transportation Master Plan. And this would be an alternative to that conventional curb and gutter sidewalk that you're used to seeing. And some alternatives would include barrier separated walkways, so taking a part of the existing pavement, like the image shows, and putting some kind of barrier to define that pedestrian area. Our neighbors, Kirkland, we actually in Redmond, there's a couple examples of this, and Kirkland's been doing quite a bit of this work as well. Another alternative would be creating a shared street. So again, kind of going back to the traffic calming conversation, really getting the speeds of the street down to 10, 15 miles per hour, making it comfortable for pedestrians to share the street with vehicles. And yeah, again, traffic calming is key there. So coming up with just, the TMPs is introducing this idea, and then it's really about how do we build this into our processes, and where would we consider a sidewalk alternative versus a conventional sidewalk. And I think also we would consider a sidewalk alternative as kind of an interim solution. It may not be in place forever, but there until a conventional sidewalk can be built, assuming there's no reasons not to do that. Okay. Pedestrian priority zones, you're probably aware that we have 3 defined pedestrian priority zones in the city. Only one of those is signed currently, and that's the downtown. Numerous streets coming in to downtown have signs that say pedestrian zone on them. It's never been super clear like what that means, so we're trying to bring more definition to that in the TMP, and really articulate, what kind of treatments, what kind of street design and operational measures can be put in place to really reinforce that the pedestrian is the priority in these areas. So again, bringing vehicle speeds down, using traffic calming measures, implementing shorter wait times at signals. We have our first pedestrian scramble, which is really exciting, and we'll see more of those in the downtown and other urban centers over the coming years. So I think this is a really great and important strategy that we'll be focused on. Wayfinding, yeah. Wayfinding it rears its head in numerous chapters, because we know that it is something that a lot of people are wanting more of, and also an acknowledgement that there is some wayfinding out there. There's a couple different sign systems out there, which may add some confusion as well. So we talk about wayfinding in a few places in the TMP, And then currently, Parks is, they put out an RFP to develop a wayfinding plan, and got a lot of response to that one, and in the process of selecting a consultant to help us. So we're very coordinated with that effort. We want to see kind of a comprehensive wayfinding system that's directing people to and from parks, but also, as you pointed out, Councilmember Kritzer, we have a lot of Council President, sorry. We have a lot of trails and streets that currently lack wayfinding. We also have these neighborhood connections, which this map's kind of hard to see. But these are these little connections between streets that aren't well signed, and we would like to utilize, get people to utilize those more because they do, and often in many cases provide the shortest route between destinations. So very important strategy there. I will pause there on the pedestrian chapter and see if there's any questions.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
No question. Just on the slide that was on pedestrian and sharing the road, love the idea of the boundaries and the barriers to kind of provide some sidewalk, bike lane where we can't really provide a proper sidewalk. But I would be lying if I said I loved a Shero. So if we could never have another Shero in the city again, I'd be real happy. And I know that's not the intent or the plan, but just wanted to voice my dislike for a Shero and dislike for the thought of, even at 10, 15 miles an hour, having folks walk and use the street as their mode. So anywhere where we can create that buffer, that would be my preference.
Mm-hmm.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thanks so much. A couple comments and then a question. I really agree with the priorities as listed for the low stress pedestrian crossings, especially those first few on the list. Like, I had a visceral, it took my breath away, yep, those are the right ones. So I'm eager to see those make it into a CIP pretty quickly. I appreciate, Michael, your comments on Strategy 6 in the pedestrian zones. I heard you say we really want to use this to articulate, but my question had been coming into tonight, can you help me understand what's happening here? Because I'm unclear. So I think we could even be more clear and reinforce our commitment to that. And one request I have in Strategy 9 to ensure safe and accessible pedestrian travel through construction areas. The text does a really good job of explaining how staff ensure compliance with this, and I do appreciate that. I would feel more comfortable if this section acknowledged that our facilities need to be restored after that construction ends. I know that is a practice elsewhere, but it'd be great to articulate it again here, just because this city is managed by dozens of plans and they need to talk to each other. And I think if folks haven't been out and visited 152nd Main Street, that is absolutely my inspiration for this comment, and the council has received feedback on that. So my one question, actually, Michael, I didn't understand your follow-up on the traffic calming. So the data-driven systematic approach, what does that data look like? What kinds of data are you talking about? And how does that allow for flexibility with some of the community requests? If a traffic pattern changes and suddenly Google is sending, a map app of your choice is sending you through a residential neighborhood more often, and neighbors are noticing and they're looking for some relief, how can we also be responsive to that? Could you help me understand what you meant by the data and the systems first?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess the first level of data analysis is what we're doing for the Transportation Master Plan. So we've identified bicycle boulevards. We want those to be comfortable streets for people to bike on, and therefore we want vehicles to go slower. So that would be a priority. We would collect speed data to kind of validate, verify complaints that we may be getting from the public. So that's another form of data that we would use. But yeah, great point. I mean, mapping applications do shift, and therefore traffic does shift. And I think, streets that are known to be cut through, allowing cut through traffic would be another priority for traffic calming. So I think certainly getting queue alerts and notifications from the public is very useful in helping alert us to those situations.
Okay, I appreciate that. And I do think it's a piece of feedback that we get from community is that it would be nice if it wasn't so hard to get something to slow down the traffic when a pattern changes. And sometimes those aren't things that neighbors feel like they can wait until the next CIP to develop. So maybe something for the council to think about in the next budget cycle.
Yeah, it's in the past, the city has had a traffic calming program and budget for that program that allowed the city to kind of respond and take, I would say, a more reactive approach to traffic calming. I do see that as an opportunity and something to consider. Maybe it's not called a traffic calming program, but it's more of a safety program that could allow, a broader approach to improving safety, which traffic calming is a component of that.
Thank you. Councilmember Fields.
Sort of, that conversation sort of reminds me of something that I'd mentioned, I don't know, a month or so ago. For me, this is all great. You guys are great. This is the direction the city should go. What I'd mentioned is, when are you going to give us the price tag? And I'm not asking that question tonight, but I am making some suggestions. When you talked about accessibility, one of our favorite residents, Brian Baker, lets us know oftentimes when he can't get anywhere. And he feels like there's no options for him and his wheelchair. And I've been out with him in his wheelchair, and I know what he's talking about. So rather than try to do everything all at once, I'm hoping that this plan eventually, before it becomes a budget request, that we definitely highlight the priorities, because we're not going to be able to create accessibility in the way that that we have talked about all of a sudden, all at once. And we're going to have to prioritize, just like you did on the bike trails, specific main routes and feeder routes and connective routes. I mean, that's your job. I'm talking about something that I'm not very good at, but I can use it, and I understand it when I see it. So that's my request, that you help the budgeting process by having a plan about where to begin.
Council Vice President Forsyth.
I just wanted to add on to that. I actually left my notes at home, but I wanted to call this one point out, and Councilmember Stewart reminded me. I wanted to read this out loud in case Mr. Baker is listening. One of the sections is modify existing approval conditions to clarify that pedestrian detour routes must be provided on the same side of the street on which the development project is occurring during all stages of development unless it's documented to be infeasible or unsafe. I think that is a huge leap and bound towards getting at the core and the root of a lot of the problems that we hear about when we have development. So I just want to say thank you for hearing us and thank you for hearing him. And I wanted to give that one a particular shout out.
Other questions? Otherwise, I have a question myself. All right, I'll jump in here. Actually, one comment and one question. The comment is appreciate the follow-up on the lighting question. I don't see really anything talking about the environmental impacts of lighting written in there. I might have missed it, but I read it a few times. I didn't quite see that. And I'm wondering whether we could add something like, we'll do these different practices to ensure lighting for safety while using best practices for lighting to reduce sky glow and light-related environmental impacts. So that way, because there are things that we can do in terms of just the type of lighting we use. I believe the International Dark Sky Association has recommendations, or there are some like science-based recommendations, even as part of the lighting recommendations that they've been using around Lake Sammamish as part of the King Conservation District and Mid-Sound Fisheries Enhancement Group project. They have a whole series of suggestions for the types of lighting we can use that helps to mitigate some of those environmental impacts. So I think if we just had a reference to that we're going to try to, it doesn't mean that we're not going to light places, because we do recognize the safety of those things, but to actually acknowledge in our plan that we're going to actively seek to use the best available science to also mitigate those issues, I think is better than just having something that might even just be like, we're going to consider how to balance these things. Because we know at least one thing we could do to balance, which would just be to use the best lighting techniques. So I don't know, did you have a comment on that otherwise?
No, that's great. No, I think that's a great comment. We can definitely look at adding something like that.
Great. And then just a question on the sidewalk alternatives and the sidewalk coverage. I mean, it's great to see, I mean, compared to a lot of other cities, the fairly low percentage we have of streets that don't have any sidewalk at all. Is the goal to be at 100% coverage? Or I guess that's a little unclear for me from the chapter. It might just be helpful to like have a sentence that articulates what the goal is. Because I imagine that the goal isn't actually 100%, but to be clear, like between sidewalk and sidewalk alternative, what is it that we're hoping to get to as part of this vision?
Yeah, I mean, I think the goal is having 100% of streets be comfortable for people to travel on. And what form that takes, I think it really is I think what we've heard is sidewalks are what people want in most cases. Or if it's an alternative type, I mean, a sidewalk, I think, means many different things to people. I think some people think of it as the, traditional curb and gutter sidewalk, that image that we showed on the screen. Some people might call that a sidewalk. We call it a walkway. But the point is there's some separation from vehicles. And I think that is the goal, to provide that.
Okay, yeah. So I would just say maybe you want to use certain languages, and the goal is to 100% sidewalks, but the goal is to have a sentence that says our goal is that all walking paths in Redmond have a level of comfort for pedestrians.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions? Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, just to quickly add on to that discussion with Council President. It goes back to my point about budget and what we can afford. When you travel to other cities who have less budget than Redmond, go to Cozumel in Mexico or wherever, they have those alternatives to sidewalks, and they're pretty effective and they work. So I think that actually is a good option, especially in the days ahead. We're going to be challenged on finances in this. Every local government is going to be challenged on finances. So I think that those are great ideas, and I encourage them.
Thank you. All right, well, I'm not seeing other questions. Do you want to take us through the end on next steps, the future of our TMP?
Sure. I just want to touch on engagement, and in particular, what we've done recently. I think we mentioned we had some focus groups with Eastside for All and I believe it was 8 other community organizations this past spring. We had 4 of these focus groups. They were well attended, and we got some great feedback. Heard some things that we've been hearing through Redmond 2050 and other outreach and engagement opportunities, but also some of the key themes that we heard from these focus groups. Going back to lighting. Lighting was very important issue for the folks in these focus groups, and like I said earlier, particularly at transit stops and where people cross the street. Bike infrastructure also was a very supported strategy. And there was a lot of discussion just around communication and how, again, kind of going back to wayfinding and using kind of universal language that non-English speakers or English as a second language speakers can understand. So I think that's something we can take forward in the wayfinding work that we're embarking on to kind of really rely more on kind of universal symbols and other visual information. And then maintenance was also kind of top of mind, mainly with having to do with sidewalks, but kind of just maintenance in general was a key concern among that group. So we're planning on having open houses in Q3. There's going to be probably at least 2 open houses where we're presenting the kind of the range of strategies and actions that we've reviewed with council and getting some feedback on that. And then, and then I guess the next step here. So we'll be coming back to you in October with the final chapters that you have not yet reviewed. That is the e-mobility chapter. We're calling it the Emerging Trends in Technology chapter, Maintenance chapter, and then performance measures, and then reviewing the Transportation Facilities Plan, which there will be some updates made to the Transportation Facilities Plan just based on the projects that we've identified in the Transportation Master Plan update. So looking forward to that in the fall.
Great, thanks so much. With that, I think we'll close out this item, and we'll look forward to seeing you back in October of this year.
Thank you.
And also those open houses. Hopefully, actually, if you can send us the information on those, we can share them amongst our networks to make sure people come out.
Absolutely.
Great. Thank you so much. The next item is the last item on our agenda, and that's council talk time. There's one item that I know was that I wanted to follow up on, which is from our motion that was made at the business meeting last business meeting to establish a new subcommittee. So wanted to loop back on that and to discuss a little bit about potential process for that subcommittee and some of the boundaries that we want to set for the subcommittee's charter as agreed by the council to be able to do for subcommittees when we establish them and as part of that conversation. So I did a little bit of thinking with Council Vice President Forsyth, and yeah, do you want to jump in to share a little bit of
Sure.
of some of what we had discussed?
Yeah, so we, council leadership got together and really framed what this subcommittee should do, and we based it. We both had the pleasure of serving on the stakeholder group for the senior and community center. So we kind of thought of it in the same terms as our experience serving on that. And since we don't know until next week what the path forward is going to be, we haven't had any of that conversation yet. We kind of kept it high level about the subcommittee would be tasked with reviewing with the staff the strategy on engaging with the community and potentially what we will learn more about in a couple of weeks. And then review the list of stakeholders that would be a part of that stakeholder group that we know is coming for whatever the next part of this process is. The subcommittee would also be responsible for coming back to council and reporting back to council what they hear in that stakeholder group. And when we participated in that stakeholder group for the community center, we were very observational in our way we interacted because we really wanted community to know that council members were there and listening, but didn't want to necessarily heavily influence that conversation and what that looked like. So we had a very much fly on the wall viewpoint unless there was something that we actually had feedback and could give feedback on. So the subcommittee would also, from our initial discussion, be involved with meeting with staff separately to discuss what they hear at those stakeholder meetings and ask questions separately so as to not necessarily influence the stakeholder group and the community conversations in those groups. And then really just come to council, report back, and have that mechanism so that council is hearing what the community feedback is directly from our fellow council members, so that we have that barrier between staff and council isn't necessarily a sticking point. So happy to hear ideas on that. And I will say from my perspective, as serving as the parks chair at the time of the stakeholder group, I thought it was a really good pairing for me to be the chair of the Parks Committee so that I could also bring that through the Parks Committee of the whole, not to put you on the spot, Angie, but I thought that was a really good meshing of my role at the time as well as being in that stakeholder engagement group. So just throwing out my own experience on that one because I feel like it's going to very much relate to whatever the next steps we face for the Firehouse Teen Center. That was a lot.
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, to recap, I think it's just kind of to get the conversation rolling. We had just thought through some of the approach to really have this group's charter be focused first, once we know what the different options are, engaging with staff on how to choose between those options, and then to support the development of the stakeholder group and then participate as the up to 3 council members in that group, but as observers while also being able to have separate meetings with staff to ask questions and then reporting back to council based on what they heard. So that was kind of suggestion from council leadership. Happy to open it up so that way we can kind of firm up, and I think we should agree as a group on what the charter is for that subcommittee. Any comments on that proposal? Councilmember Fields.
So the motion, which passed 7-0, and I think Council Vice President Forsyth hit on most of it, which the motion itself was to improve transparency and community engagement on the old firehouse/teen center. So, and I think that the way you've described it basically does that. I think that once the subcommittee is established and you have, and I would suggest at least 3 council members, the only part about what I just heard is the fly on the wall. I think that I understand the senior center had a lot of very similar issues. And as I heard somebody earlier say, we gave the seniors their space as part of that manifestation of the community center. We made sure that when we built a senior/community center, that we made sure that the seniors had a space. We now need to do the same thing. We owe that to our teens. They need their space. So it may be more than just being passive or observing, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, Council Vice President, but I'm just expressing my concern about the fly on the wall thing. I think this may take a little more direct action from council. Council passed this motion that we would be involved, we'd form a subcommittee, and that we would improve transparency and we would improve community engagement. That's just not to say that we take that over from the mayor, that we work collaboratively with the mayor and the mayor's staff, but council needs to assert its responsibilities here.
Thank you for that input. I think, we could add into the scope would be identifying mechanisms for the council to engage with community on this. With all the different stakeholders. I think the idea specifically that would be helpful to note in terms of council members' roles during the stakeholder meetings. For example, the Senior Community Center stakeholder group was 50 people that met every single month as we were developing the design. They met with the architects and gave feedback. They literally said, no, you have to move the kitchen over here because this is how we use the space. And it was really great. And it was a multi-generational group. We didn't just seniors, but all kinds of different stakeholders throughout our community that cared about that too, which was really interesting. But I think it was important for them to be able to weigh in on that and not feel influenced by council members saying, this is what we want, if what we were trying to do was listen to what the community wants. And so I think that's just in those specific spaces. But there may also be, I think, to what you're bringing up, is it is important for the council to be able to directly engage and talk with community members. It may be that the whole council wants to do some of those things. So it could be part of the subcommittee's task to identify, what does it look like to plan, once we have more information, a formal conversation for the council with, or like a town hall or some sort of forum to be able to gather additional information, or what are some of those mechanisms. And I think that this subcommittee could be tasked with coming up with those ideas, bringing them back to council, and then we could all decide on how we want to move forward on that. Other thoughts? I'm happy to write this down and kind of send it out so that we could all have some more bounds on this, but wanted to just open it up as well. Okay, great. So I think, and then I think in terms of the actual establishment of the subcommittee, we should identify who will serve on the subcommittee. So wanted to open it up for folks to volunteer. I know Council Vice President Forsyth did note that it might be helpful to have Councilmember Nueva Camino on there. Councilmember Anderson, you're interested? Great. Councilmember Fields is interested. I think I would be interested as council leadership, especially if we're going to be doing some organizing on this, to be able to participate. Are any other council members interested in this? Councilmember Nueva Camino?
Just for clarification, I know that yes, it was suggested, and yes, I'm formally letting you know that I would be interested. So that my silence over here is not passive in any way. That no, I would like to be on it.
Great. Councilmember Stewart?
I just want to state for the record, would be happy to be interested. My plate is rather full and there is lots of other interests, so happy to support the group as it moves forward.
Great. Council Vice President Forsyth?
I will second that motion of, not technical motion, but of definitely interested. I think we're all very interested in making sure that this is done well and that teen voices are heard and listened to, and we're all very much in support of making this happen, but there's a lot of interest, so I will take myself out of the running.
Great. Well, since we have 4 people that are interested, I think what we had decided when we had looked at when we had come up with some of our boundaries around council creating subcommittees was that council leadership could assess and decide on who the 3 members of the subcommittee would be. So now that we know the interest, I can loop back with Council Vice President Forsyth and we can follow up with the council to bring our recommendation on the 3 subcommittee members. And then we can also kind of send out what we've heard from everyone, a recap, and happy to loop back on that. I also wanted to bring up that it was brought up at the last meeting that we had discussed at our last study session, formally adopting those kind of subcommittee guidelines into our council rules. And it seemed like people wanted to just do that as one piece. I wanted to follow up just to make sure, would council members be okay if we just put that onto new business at a future business meeting, or would you like to see it through committee first? Any comments on that? Councilmember Stewart?
I would be comfortable with new business. We've got this a couple times now.
We did spend a lot of time on it, so I didn't want to do an extra rev. Okay, great. I'm not seeing objections to that. No one else has opinions. So yeah, we'll work as part of agenda setting to put that item onto new business at an upcoming business meeting as soon as we're able to get those materials together, but hopefully very soon. So that way, we're kind of using those right now, but that way we can have that formalized for future creation of subcommittees as well. Great. Well, thank you all so much, and glad that we have a plan. And I think, as mentioned, in 2 weeks, we'll get more information, and I think that'll give this subcommittee the opportunity, you know, the opportunity to be able to work with staff on how it is that we, as the first step, really engage with community on choosing between any sort of options that we're presented with. We don't know exactly what all the options will be or what the data will be, but when we see it, we'll be able to have more conversation. So I'm looking forward to engaging with our community on that. Any other items for council talk time? Councilmember Stewart.
Thanks so much. I just wanted to follow up. Deidre set up an awesome spreadsheet for us on the community outreach. I've started to have a couple of those meetings. I wasn't clear on how I should report back. Are we bringing those to talk time? Would folks like it in an email? What should I do next, or what should we do next?
Actually, I had a question for the mayor on this because I did see that we got a special meeting on our schedule. We had requested that we actually schedule some sort of special meeting to have a discussion with the mayor and the council where we could all bring some of the feedback that we were hearing and kind of talk about how do we integrate that feedback. I did see we got a 30-minute special meeting on our calendars just this last week with our federal lobbyists, but I wasn't sure if that was intended to be kind of the use of this same meeting request, or if we may be setting up a different meeting. I'm happy to follow up.
Yeah, I'm not totally following if that's all the same thing, but that 30-minute meeting is an opportunity to hear from our federal lobbyist what's going on in the federal government and for the council members to ask questions. So that's all that is. So if there's something else, let me know that you need.
Okay, great. So yeah, so I think the goal will be for us to set up another meeting in addition where we can do a debrief. And once we actually get that meeting on the calendar, I think we should all see that as our deadline to try to do the outreach before that time. My hope is that that'll be within this month, so that way we can, or by maybe first week of August, we'll see, to be able to have some of those discussions and make sure that we're following up and responding to our community. Mayor Bernie, and not to put you on the spot again, but can you give us any updates on the conversations, in particular planning on the conversation around immigration with some of our community-based organizations?
Yes, I had an opportunity to meet with some members of our community last week and talked with them about setting up a meeting with council, and we are working toward that. We also had some other items that we took care of, but yes, it's in the works, but hasn't been set up yet. So I'll talk with council leadership about what can work for that and what that will look like.
Great, thank you. So we'll be reporting back on that, but it's great to hear that you've been in conversation with those community-based organizations and making sure that they're getting the support that they need, but also that hopefully we can get that scheduled as soon as possible. So those are a couple pieces of follow-up. And I will note for those who didn't note it yet that there is that available sign up on the SharePoint. So if someone signed up also to talk to an organization and you also are going to be talking to them, you can also put your name down and say that you're planning to talk to them as well. So, because there may be some doubling up just because we're all out in community, we're engaging with folks and we may have different touch points with them. So it's helpful to just know who's doing that and making sure that we get some coverage. I'll also note, I think Deidre said this, we put some ideas in there. I think a few council members have emailed ideas of saying add this group to the list, but should you not see a group on the list that you think we should be engaging, just feel free to email that. And then last thing I'll just note from council leadership is just a reminder that this weekend is Redmond Derby Days. So we'll be marching in the Grand Parade together, being festive. Feel free to bring your family and friends to be a part of our float. And we'll have bubbles and candy to hand out, and we'll have popsicles for our booth. You should have your time that you're going to be staffing the council table. And we've invited our commissioners and RIPAC to join us at that table, as well as a lot of the commissions will have tables around the area. The Redmond Firefighters Benevolent Fund is also going to be doing their pancake breakfast, so you can all join in for that. It seemed like the logistics, we asked about the kids' bike race, which we participated in last year, and it seemed like the logistics were complicated this year, so council, you can go and cheer them on, but we don't have a formal role in that this year. I'll also be helping to kick off the bike races at the Velodrome on Friday night, so anyone who wants to come and cheer on with that, that'll be really fun. And then also I know the mayor's office sent out invitation to all the council members to be able to join in and watch the drone show together, so just make sure to email back if you're planning to join in on that, and enjoy being out in community. Any other comments for council talk time? All right, seeing none, that brings us to the end of the agenda, and this meeting is adjourned.